farming is going to be part of the solution, but we need incentives, not a stick every day.
Hello and welcome to AgriFocus with myself, Stella Meehan. Today I'm joined on the podcast by President of the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association, the ICMSA, Denis Drennan. As the weather starts to improve and we have gotten silage season underway with many farmers focused on breeding, and we are just going through peak milk, we cannot ignore the fact that there are important elections up and coming. That's the local and the European elections. So today the ICMSA launched its guide to election 2024, which it said is aimed at making political candidates aware of the issues which are important to farmers and those living in rural communities, as well as alerting those in the agricultural sector of what needs to be given a voice. Denis, thanks for joining us today. Firstly, before we get to the ins and outs, I suppose, of the guide and the issues that are affecting most farmers at the moment, one of the blunt pieces of information I think that you gave in the guide was towards potential candidates or potential MEPs or local councillors, as the case may be, that farmers now have the right to go, we'll say, back to basics in terms of choosing their political representative, and that maybe, I suppose, in another way of saying it, the traditional way of voting where a particular household might be staunch Fianna Fáil or staunch Fine Gael or whatever they may be down through the years, candidates cannot expect that of farmers now. Farmers will be voting for people who actually represent their interests, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks, Stella. Yeah, I suppose, look at people have a lot more information. First of all, we're non-political, so we don't get involved. We just kind of give to people the questions to ask and the priorities of what is going to be beneficial to farmers. But yeah, I think the days of a household being a staunch one colour shirt or another colour shirt or whichever is long gone. I think everybody has information at their fingertips. Somebody puts out a comment, it's all over the country, like in milliseconds, and if somebody comes out with something that's not non-farmer friendly or basting the farmers or sacrificing the farmers in lieu of another sector, it's known very quickly. And I think people are able to judge, on what people are saying and doing and how they're voting, on matters affecting farming. And that's well known, and you can't hide behind anything anymore.
No, absolutely. And as I suppose there has been a rise in independent candidates representing more rural areas or rural issues. And we saw it as well with the Dutch local elections, how popular farming voters were in terms of voting for farmers or people that they felt represented them. And obviously the ICMSA, non-political, but you're constantly dealing with government departments and going over to Brussels and so on like that. So do you think that there is an appetite, like for example from your own members out there, for farmers who really want someone who's just going to represent them and understand what they do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think there's a frustration, not alone with farmers with rural Ireland, like that. A lot of the political parties have become very focused on the urban centres and what's going to get them the votes in the urban centres. And you can understand, look, politicians are about vote counters. And that's what they need to get elected or to form a government or be part of a government. Probably the days of an overall majority are probably gone in this country for the foreseeable future anyway. So, they're looking at the urban centres. That's where the high number of votes are. That's where the high number of people are going to be elected from. So it's that's what they're focusing on. And I think there's a frustration in rural areas that rural areas have been forgotten about.
Let's drill down into some of the issues then affecting farmers, particularly at the moment. And I guess one that affects all kinds of farming, Denis, is the issue of farm margins and economic stability, I suppose, for farm families and farm income. What would you expect or hope for from European politicians, from the European Commission, or, I suppose obviously some of that then comes from national politics, which we may or may not have a general election, inside the next 12 months. But what would you be hoping that politicians could do, particularly the European ones coming up now, in terms of ensuring a viable, sustainable economic future for farming, whatever sector that might be within farming, but, so that it is something that people can still get into and think they'll make a livelihood from it?
There's a bit of a change happening in probably the last 6 months, that if you look at where the history of CAP came from, it was, the treaty were owned back in 1958 formed CAP, and it was a food security issue. And, Europe wasn't capable of feeding itself back then, and there was starvation all over the place after the Second World War. And it became, the Common Agricultural Policy became, food security issue. But I suppose in the last maybe 10 or 15 years, it went from being a food security issue to being used as an environmental means and public money for public good. And people all felt, well, instead of having it as a subsidy for producing cheap food, we'll also use it as a stick to beat farmers with that if they don't farm in an environmentally friendly manner. They're not going to get their money. But I think there's a realization now that there's a mass exodus. I had a Swedish journalist on the farm this morning, and they said there's a huge emphasis in Sweden at the moment that they realize that they're nowhere near self-sufficient in food, that the amount of young people over the last 30 years that have walked away from farming, and you can see it happening all across Europe, that people are just frustrated with the amount of rules and regulations that are coming in. It's regulation after regulation, and it's rules and rules, and there's no incentives to become farming. And you mix that with the volatility and income from farming, young people have other options and are walking away. So I think there's a bit of a rebalancing happening with Belgium as the presidents of the EU at the moment, like that food security is coming back on the table, and they realise that if they drive all the farmers out of farming and they put emphasis totally on environmentally, like for a farmer to be, for a rural community to be sustainable, it has to be socially, environmentally and economically sustainable. And if the economic part is not there, the other two also fall. So I think there's a bit of a rebalancing happening at the moment, and I think that's what's needed from Europe, that they need to realise that, there's so many other options out there for young people to run up on a farm, that a lot of people are walking away. And it's reflective also, if you talk to any group of young people old farmers at the moment, not young people, succession is a huge issue because people are just walking away. And I think it's time Europe realise that if we want this sustainable food, it comes at a cost. And there has to be a margin for the farmer. Number one, for him to stay in business, he or she to stay in business, to reinvest in their farm with more environmentally friendly technology and systems, and also to encourage the next generation of farming.
Well, two very big election issues there, actually. Not for you or I to be, I suppose, back and forth on it. This is for the politicians to determine. Two issues there, which are farmers need more for producing sustainable food. So do you want the farmer vote or raise the price of food for consumers to, according to what it costs for the production of sustainable and environmental, which is never popular with politicians. So
some leaders are going to have to show leadership and inform the general public. Farmers get frustrated when they hear people on the radio talking about, the cost of living has gone up and my shopping has gone up, the price of my shopping trolley was costing me X and now it's costing me X multiplied by or X plus whatever. But somebody has to make those people aware that the cost on farm has also gone up equally, if not more, probably on a multiplier effect because it's on a bigger scale. Like, my electricity bill has gone up the same as everybody else. My fuel bill has gone up. My labour bill has gone up. All those other costs that affect a household are affecting the production of food on the farm. So that has to result in a better price to the farmer. Like the increase in price cannot be just borne by everybody from the fridge in the supermarket back. It has to go the whole way through. And somebody needs to, if you want sustainable, nutritious, environmentally friendly food, it comes at a cost. And somebody has to pay for it.
Well, it is funny, I suppose, in society when you look at it, and 9 times out of 10 now in various services, be that in a hairdresser or be that you go to the local mechanic for the service this year or fix, brake pads that cost you a certain amount last year, they cost you this year. Everything has gone up and people accept it. And, they very kindly put a message on their social media, due to increases in electricity and labour and so on, we have now increased the price of a haircut or we have done this, and everyone accepts that. But if anybody puts up the price of a litre of milk, there's world war and people won't accept it.
Absolutely.
It is, I suppose, a bit of it's ironic in some ways, that people are willing to accept increases in price because they can realistically see, the cost of, a hairdresser, the cost of another service, whatever it might be, has gone up, so they have more electricity. Insurance goes up every year and people have to pay it. But they don't accept that for food, for food production.
Like when I get up every morning and I press the button on my milk machine, the electricity cost has gone up. Like if I fertiliser since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, it's probably double the price it was pre that invasion. Feed has gone up because the cost of cereals and that have increased, rightly so, because the tillage farmer has increased costs. labour has gone up because it's more expensive to live. So the people that are working on the farms have to be paid more. My diesel bill has gone through the roof in the last number of years, same as everybody else's car cost has gone up. So, I mean, they're the things that the common sense approach has to be, and realisation has to be there.
And in terms then, let's look at the dairy sector. Just at the minute now, we're, in mid-May, we've had, I suppose, the last 12 months, we've had severe challenges with weather. What are the biggest challenges for the moment in terms of dairy farming, would you say, Dennis?
Margin again. It's the biggest problem.
Margin, yeah.
I mean, okay, if you said to me 5 years ago that you'd be getting 41, 42 cents a litre for milk, I'd say that'd be great. We'll be rolling in the hay. Everybody'd be happy out. But the problem is the margin is just not there. The cost of production has increased so much. If you go on Teagasc figures, average price of milk last year about 42, 43 cents a litre. Average cost of production 37, 38. So 5 cents a litre of a margin. And that's before you pay wages or before you get an income for yourself or pay borrowings. Repayments. So the margin is just not there at the moment. And look, at the milk markets are a bit sluggish at the moment. There's no supply anywhere. World supply is actually down almost 1%. Yet there's just no demand coming. So the markets are a bit sluggish at the moment. So that's a huge problem. And on top of that, then you have a huge increase in cost because of the weather. I mean, you should have cows out since February and out, lying in pastures full of grass and that. But it's been a tough, hard slog all spring with cows in, out, but predominantly in due to the weather. So that's another huge problem. And the fact that they've been in then and the grass quality has kind of gone out of control in a lot of places. It's starting to come back under control. That's why the silage been cut in bits and pieces all over the place. So you have a triple whammy. You have bad weather, you have high cost, but also production has been hit severely and solids have been hit severely because cows have been indoors. So it's almost like the perfect storm on a dairy farm at the moment that just the margin is not there. The production is way down, as you can see from the CSO figures. Milk production is probably down over 15% so far this year. And then the value of the milk is also down because the solids are down. So it's a tough spring on farms.
It's a very tough spring, but what does that even mean then as we head towards back end? Obviously the weather has picked up somewhat slightly, but we don't know what the next 3 or 4 months are going to. We could get another 2 months of storms for all we know. We would hope not. But as we look forward towards the end of the year or even into next year, how is that impacting on the mentality then of farmers?
I've never seen morale as low. I mean, people are physically, mentally, financially and emotionally on a very low point at the moment. Like it's really tough going. The physical work of the winter, which has dragged on now until May, is really taking its toll. The financial pressure that's under, the volatility that has been in the milk market in the last 3 to 4 years has just been incredible. You've gone from a price of 56 cents a litre 2 years ago down to as low as 33 cents a litre. So 23 cents per litre swing in 1 year. It's very hard for anybody to plan their business. That sort of volatility, and that's why part of our election campaign would be that there would be an income volatility tax measure so that you're not getting fleeced for the tax year, that you make a few bob and then skint the following year with no cash flow. And that's feeding into the whole rural economy because, if a farmer makes money, let it be a dairy farmer, tillage farmer, whatever, they keep their bills paid, they reinvest in their farm. But when they get to the stage that there's no money to be reinvested, everybody else in the rural economy suffers as well.
Absolutely.
The multiplier effect from farming income is about 2.5 times. For every euro that's earned on a farm, it circulates in the economy. In tech, it's about 1.2. So it's a huge difference. The multiplied effect it has on rural Ireland, that's depending on a lot of areas will be depending on farming income to be spread around the place.
Absolutely. And then let's just look, we focus there and there's challenges certainly for the dairy sector, but I know the ICMSA recently has been quite critical in terms of the beef prices that beef farmers are getting as well at the minute. And again, in the run-up to a European election, it might be just no harm to mention Mercosur and the proposed Mercosur trade deal and so on, and what impact that might have. Obviously, politicians can't set beef price. We know that. They'll come back and say that, it's a private-run business, they can't set beef price or whatever. But what's the concern there with the Mercosur, for example?
I think when some of the European politicians came out back in February and set a target that they were going to have the Mercosur deal across the line before the Parliament lifted before the European elections, I actually think that was the final straw that broke the camel's back and caused the protest across Europe. because on one hand, you have European policy driving towards a more environmentally sustainable food production system, and more rules, more regulations, and we're not going to accept food that's not produced except at this standard, which farmers are willing to do if they're paid for it. But on the other side then, they're also trying to sign a deal to get in substandard food products from cheaper parts of the world that involves chopping down rainforests, and we won't get into all that. But it's the lack of a level playing field that really annoyed people, that here we have more and more rules and regulations coming in for European farmers, yet we're willing to do a trade deal with and bring in food into Europe to compete with our own high standard of food. That's not fair.
It's a bit hypocritical in some ways. I mean, you can't speak out of both sides of your mouth.
No, it's totally unfair to put burdens on European farmers to farm in a certain way and then be willing to accept food in from of a substandard nature from other parts of the world.
And just there on the environment, I suppose, and the sustainability, which is something that gets brought up a lot, particularly in the dairy sector, but not just all sectors are affected and have to adapt, and we all do. Whether that's in agriculture, transport, energy, whatever it is, everyone has to do their part in terms of reducing emissions. But when people say that agriculture is the problem, not all people, I mean, some people just say it is a problem along with other sectors, which is fair enough. How can farmers then not contribute to being such a problem if that is the case? How can they contribute to being more environmentally friendly on the incomes they're currently on? Or is that even possible?
Well, that's the problem. To farm more sustainably, it costs more to produce the food. But if you're not getting a return from the marketplace, what happens? Land abandonment happens, and you'll have a mass exodus from the sector. But farming is part of the solution. If you take the different sectors in Ireland at the moment, in fairness to Teagasc, they developed the first MAC curve back in 2012 that was going to get us to a 19% reduction in emissions. Within about 6 months of the latest targets of 25% being set, they revisited the MAC curve and adjusted it accordingly and implemented some new measures and have us on a roadmap to get us to 25% reduction. And I think we will go very close to hitting that. We will go far closer to hitting that than any other sector will, because the transport sector had a target of putting 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. That's out the window, not achievable. And certainly the way the fall in electric cars is at the moment, the sales are plummeting. It's not going to happen. The energy sector had a plan of putting wind turbines off the west coast of the country. Not going to happen. Not economically viable. It'll happen in the North Sea, but not off the Atlantic coast. So, as a sector, we're going to be miles ahead of reaching our targets than any other sector, yet we're still the baddies. And it's very frustrating as a farmer when you see a cow eating grass in the field and she's turning that grass, which is actually carbon from the atmosphere, because through photosynthesis, grass converts carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into grass. So that's where it comes from. So there's a carbon cycle within the farming cycle of carbon dioxide from the air converted into grass. The cow converts that into milk and meat, and also through respiration releases carbon dioxide, the same as you and me do, Stella, and everybody else here does. And okay, there is methane released, but that has a half-life of about 11 years, in which it's turned back into carbon dioxide, and the grass sequesters it again. But if you compare that to the fossil fuel industry, who dig fossil fuels out of the ground that's been there for thousands of years, burn it and release it into the atmosphere, it's fresh carbon, there's no cycle. Yet we blame farming. It's incredibly frustrating.
No, it is. And I know a lot of farmers feel the same as you on this particular issue in relation to the emissions from agriculture. And there are differing opinions. Obviously, we have the MAC curve. You'll have the EPA who say that farming is responsible for a third of emissions. And then, of course, there's the argument over the emissions figure, sort of asterisks, and how long it lasts in the methane lasts in the air and so on. But in terms of what it costs then to be environmentally sustainable, would you say that you've seen a shift in the way farming is done in this country over the last, we'll say, 5 years?
Absolutely.
In terms of using more. Now, I still have seen in recent days, like a lot of the older units for spreading slurry. But would you see more of the less? More of the, what's the fertiliser or nitrogen usage like?
Well, sure. Like if you look at any of the measures, like low emission slurry spreading, like has taken off completely. Like I mean, the tanker manufacturers are still under pressure. There's such demand there. I actually, my neighbour, I congratulated a brand new one out last night, spreading away. So he was happy out with himself now, and very happy with the way it's working. So I mean, you've low emission slurry spreading. Like in the next probably 2 years, you're going to end up with 90% of the slurry in the country spread by low emission slurry spread, and that's a huge change. That has been embraced by farmers. Protected urea sales have gone through the roof as a percentage of the total nitrogen being spread in the country, and like we've already exceeded our targets for the cut in the use of chemical nitrogen that we had for 2030 to get 300,000 tonnes. We're now down to 280,000 tonnes. Like if you look at the EBI, the national herd is really improving. So all of the measures that are on the MAC curve have been embraced by farmers, and probably the supply of the technology is the only thing that's really holding the thing back. Like, so we're running as fast as we can, and it is being embraced. And as it's been proven, clover incorporation has gone huge. Multi-species swarts are gone huge. Red clover silage has gone very popular. So, like farmers, for something that's only come on the last 2 or 3 years, like farmers are really embracing any of this new technology that's available to them. So, I mean, as I said, as a sector, we're way ahead of any other sector.
And I might just kind of wrap up on that then, Denis. We started out kind of talking in the context of the local and European elections coming up. And I suppose over the next couple of weeks that are left, farmers and farm families and people living in rural areas will have people coming to their farm gate or to the front door looking for elections. Some of those will be entirely new candidates. Some will be MEPs that are already sitting in Europe at an approved cap, and, whatever else, controversial legislation such as nature restoration law. What sort of advice would you have for members or farmers in I suppose, being discerning when people do come to their gate or to their door?
Well, what's hugely frustrating as farmers is that every sector has targets. And like if you look at somebody, would say, who's living in your semi-D in whichever town or city you want in the country, if they want to put solar panels on their roof, it's heavily incentivized. If they want to buy an electric car, it's heavily incentivized. So, if you're a farmer, you're regulated to become more environmentally friendly. If you're a normal householder, you're incentivized. And I think we need a change there. Like, farming is going to be part of the solution, but we need incentives, not a stick every day.
Yeah, so it's the argument of the carrot or the stick, and I suppose farmers feel they're getting too much stick and very little carrot in recent years in comparison to other sectors. It's
rules and regulations, and that's where the frustration is building up at farm level, is that the amount of rules and regulations that are being brought in, and even when we bring them in, they're not even given time to work and have the desired effect. People just see we need to do more, but we need a balance of what everybody can do as a citizen and what farmers are being expected to do. Because everybody needs to put their shoulder to wheel. If this is a national crisis, everybody needs to be involved, not just farmers.
Yeah, you mentioned there that things not being given the chance to even, starting a new measure, but then not getting the chance to actually measure it. Like, for example, I know there's a great argument there for the nitrates derogation, and that the water quality hasn't been given time to see how the measures implemented by farmers have, transpired or the outcomes of that yet.
No, it's hugely frustrating. Like, you bring in new measures and they're expected to work overnight. Yet from the agricultural catchment programme, we can see that there's a lag period between when a new measure is brought in and when it actually shows an effect. And the other thing then is, like, we've had extreme weather for the last number of years, but that's not being allowed for either. Like, I mean, the rain that has fallen in the past 10 months, we're gone into month number 11 at this point with torrential rain day after day. But I mean, that's going to have an effect on water quality. So if the water quality disimproves now, are we going to be blamed? And, somebody needs to start maybe blaming God for some of this rather than the farmers, because we can't control the weather, thankfully at times. But it's been very difficult on farms, and then to be blamed for something that's out of your control is very frustrating.
Yeah, and I know from personal experience with the insurance company, anything that's considered an act of God won't be paid out on, that's for sure.
There you go.
So he or she or whatever, they have a lot to answer for. Listen, Denis Drennan, thank you very much for joining us on the AgriFocus podcast today. I'm afraid that's all we have time for on this week's episode. If you want to rate and review, please do give us 5 stars on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also listen to the podcast or the Farming Week podcast on the Agriland smartphone app, and do share it with anyone who you think might be interested. Until next time, goodbye and take care.